Well, today we're going to talk about you need to know this. And to which somebody said when I told them the title, I won't mention Brian's name specifically, but he said, "What do I need to know?" And I said, This is what you need to know. So we're going to talk, because I was homesick a couple days this week, I had a little bit of extra time to look at things and read some stuff a little bit more in depth, which means that I now have about 140 slides this morning to try to get through. And I'll try to talk as fast as we can, but we talk about the convergence of events, and that I know I say this a lot, but I think that this has been about as busy a week as I've seen. I guess everybody was back from the holidays, and it just seems like everything is going crazy. I've updated my 70th week slide a little bit. I want to explain just a little bit to you what I'm thinking about. In that, I've been thinking a lot about the seals of Revelation and when they occur. And we all want to put them in the 70th week, and some people say they're outside the 70th week, and some say they're only in the 70th week, and some say they're only in the first half of the 70th week. But my view has become more that the seven-sealed scroll is opened, but it's partially open. So that's why I think this graphic that I found, and I don't remember where I found it, is a pretty good, because it shows how the scroll would be open and reveal information, then a second seal would reveal more information, third seal, et cetera, all the way down the line. But the one thing, too, to remember is that you start with the first seal, white horse, and it says that the white horse rider goes forth conquering and to conquer. So what happens is that the first seal opens, but the entire impact of the first seal doesn't happen immediately. It's spread out over a long period of time. Same way with the second, third, and fourth seal. And the fourth seal, a lot of people say, and I disagree with them, that a quarter of the earth will die. But I don't think that's what the scripture says. The scripture says that he'll be given power over a quarter of the earth to put them to death. But it doesn't say that they're actually put to death. So I think it's very important that we actually look at what that says. But it doesn't mean that the fourth seal opens and boom, a quarter of the world has died, if that's the way it's going to work out. It happens over a period of time, so that there's sort of this crescendo of all these events happening. So that's just my view, and I'm sure it's right. And if you disagree with it, someday, and eventually we'll all know who's right. And as I've said, the 30 minutes of silence in heaven that's mentioned in Revelation is probably so everybody can figure out how they're going to backpedal on all the positions that they took that turned out to be wrong. And I'm sure that, I said this, I'll take credit for this. One of the dishes at the marriage supper of the Lamb will be humble pie. And there'll be plenty of people eating humble pie at the marriage supper of the Lamb. So that's, I also want to mention, we're in the season of Hanukkah. I have a view that Daniel talks about a period of time. It talks about 1,260 days. Then it talks about 1,290 days and 1,335 days. I and a number of other people believe that the second coming of the Lord happens on day 1,260 of the second half of the 70th week. That also coincides, I believe, and there's a lot of reasons for this, with the repentance of the Jewish people under great stress. The national repentance happens at that time, and it is a day of atonement. And that's because of some of the description of what's going on at that time in Revelation, and it sort of coincides with descriptions of what happened on Day of Atonement in the Old Testament. So that's why I think that's the Day of Atonement. The interesting thing is Daniel has this 75-day period tacked on. And I did a teaching a number of years ago, maybe some of you, the 5 people that probably looked at it, remember, called A Future Hanukkah. And the reason for that is if you go from the Day of Atonement and you go forward 75 days on the Jewish calendar, you are in the Feast of Hanukkah, which is the Feast of Dedication, or the Feast actually of Rededication. It was when they rededicated the temple. Happened during the period of the Maccabees, the miracle of the, not just enough, a little bit of oil in the menorah, but it burned for 8 days. That's why they celebrated over 8 days. That's why they have the 9 arms in the menorah that they use for Hanukkah. And Jesus celebrated Hanukkah. We know that he went up to Jerusalem for the Feast of Dedication. So when's this new millennial temple going to be dedicated? Could it be on Hanukkah? God makes very specific dates and appointments. So that's just my view. And again, you're free to disagree and be wrong. So far. As I always say, I believe and this is the way it's going to happen so far. And it seems like we get thrown a lot of curveballs at times that, well, they're not just quite working out the way that we think. And so it's always interesting to watch people, it'll be kind of fun and sporting, I think, to watch people backpedal on positions that they've held and books that they've written about positions that they hold. That's why I haven't written a book. So always best to put things in digital content. Again, the verse that we read so often in 2 Timothy chapter 3, this know also that in the last days perilous times shall come. I'm going to try to move through everything very, very quickly today. But for men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying the power thereof. From such turn away. For of this sort are they which creep into houses and lead captive silly women laden with sins, led away with divers lusts, ever learning and never able to come to knowledge of the truth. In Luke chapter 17, the Lord says, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it also be in the days of the Son of Man. They did eat, they drank, they married wives, they were given in marriage until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and the flood came and destroyed them all. Likewise, also was it as it was in the days of Lot. They did eat, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they builded. 2 Peter chapter 2 talks about the fact that Lot was righteous, and they delivered just Lot, the angels delivered just Lot, vexed with what? The filthy conversation of the wicked. And then in parentheses it explains, for that righteous man, and I don't know that you would necessarily, reading some of the story of Lot, that would be the conclusion you would come to, that he was a righteous man or just, but that's how Scripture, that's how Peter talked about him. And Peter learned from the Lord, so I assume that Peter had pretty good instructor on that particular topic. For that righteous man dwelling among them and seeing and hearing vexed his righteous soul from day to day with their unlawful deeds. And then the verse that we read so often, woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. One of the characteristics of the last days will be lawlessness. And it's going to be a top-down thing. I'm often struck by the parallels between what's going on with our president and leadership and Israel and their prime minister and leadership. Now, the reports are this morning that the police are recommending prosecution of Prime Minister Netanyahu. He has come out with a statement and says the police do this all the time. The guy who's currently the police head is, I think he's transitioning out today or tomorrow, and somebody else is coming in, and he doesn't really care for Prime Minister Netanyahu. And we've been hearing about imminent indictments of Prime Minister Netanyahu and Sarah Netanyahu for some time now. The report is the police say that they should indict both of them for bribery in connection with whatever. I can't remember the specific, I think it's case 4,000 or 3,000 is the way they number it. So whether it'll happen or not, I don't know. The final decision is not the police, it's the prosecutor. And it's always the prosecutor, makes the decisions. We see this going on with our president and some of the things happening with plea deals and that type of thing. What you need to understand, just the sort of the thumbnail sketch, I mentioned Jerome Corsi last week or week before. He's been under pressure to plead guilty to lying to the investigators. He has now come out and said, I'm not going to do it, because to do that would be a lie. And so I admire his standing up to this, and this is what the prosecutors do. And what you see is virtually all the cases, except for maybe Manafort's cases, all of the things that Mueller has gotten people to plead to have been what I would call process crimes. They are crimes that have occurred, supposedly, in the course of the investigation. And they find things, like Corsi said, they were asking me about emails of things that I'd written 2 or 3 years ago. They refused in the interviews to show me, or the testimony before the grand jury, they refused to show me the interview, or the emails, the documents that I'd written. So I did the best that I could, but I kept telling them if I could just look at my emails, I could tell you exactly what. I haven't gone back and reviewed. I mean, how many of you go back and review your old emails every day? I mean, I get, I clean out my box when I get up to about 10,000 unread ones, because it piles up. And that's just my personal, let alone the ones I get at work. Well, you can't remember everything that you've written in an email. And the prosecutors were beating me. You're going to go to jail for the rest of your life. He goes, I don't care. Put me in jail for the rest of my life. I'm not lying to you. I'm telling you my best recollection. So they force him into process crimes. Now, I have a problem with this. Everybody says, well, why didn't you just plead the Fifth Amendment? Well, if you haven't done anything wrong, why do you plead the Fifth Amendment? So people go in there in good faith to talk, and the prosecutor, look, as a trial attorney, if I did this, I would quickly lose my license. And so here's an example of the lawlessness of the last days. Here's an interview. This is in the Boston Herald the other day. Incoming top prosecutor Rachel Rollins, firm but flexible on no prosecute offenses. Now, what's she talking about? Well, what she's doing is she's talking about the fact that she is going to I don't understand why I had all this stuff lined up on my phone, and then it doesn't save the pages. So this is going from memory. So if you want, go to the Boston Herald, look up this article on Rachel Rollins. But what she's saying is, look, I'm not going to waste my time prosecuting property crimes like shoplifting, resisting arrest, nonviolent crimes, which I've seen a lot of people resist arrest, and it would seem to be resist arrest sort of implies that it's not nonviolent. It's actually violent. But she's not going to do this. I was listening to Dennis Prager talking to somebody about it. A Chicago policeman called in and said they stopped prosecuting shoplifting under $1,000. Well, what do you think that's done to shoplifting in Chicago? He says on the Magnificent Mile, it's rampant, and people that run the stores, they can't handle it. And what happens is people steal, they look at the tags, and as long as it's under $1,000, they just walk right out of the store. If they get caught, they get a citation. It's not even prosecuted as a misdemeanor. They get a citation, and they just throw it away. It would seem to encourage the behavior that, this is the prosecutor of Suffolk County, Boston, Massachusetts. It's shocking. You see other things a lot in this. This is a guy named Andy Ngo, I don't know how you say it. And he is a conservative guy, and he's been going to these Antifa rallies. So he has some videos up. I will give you a language warning. For example, here's a guy who went to Antifa, and it says here, fascists not welcome here. And they consider him a fascist. He's Asian American. He's walking down the street. They won't let him walk. They block him. They have people openly carrying guns with the Antifa, face mask and that type of thing on. They attack him. They get in his face. And this guy came up and said, and I blocked out the one word, I'm not, oh, I forgot there is one there I didn't block out. Oops. Well, so the other, look, I mean, it's not like we've never heard this word before. I'm known to do this for real, he says. Are you willing to die for YouTube stuff? Death is coming to you. And you can go watch the video, and this is exactly what the guy says. And we're the fascists, the racists, the haters, the violent people. It's insane. This transgender thing, I think, is probably one of the biggest indicators. This is their website, Drag Queen Story Hour, and I've shared a number of these. You can go like Topeka, Kansas, or Wichita, Kansas. They have a Drag Queen Story Hour at the library, and the place is packed with families with little kids. The Daily Wire, to their credit, came out and said, look, drag queen admits to grooming children at library story hour events. And this is what's happening, is there's this grooming of children. You heard the stories in England, Great Britain, about mainly Pakistani gangs of men who groomed young women to have sex with them. They raped them. And some of the stories, I can't even begin to repeat some of the things that were done to these women. Some of them became pregnant as young as age 13 or 14. The men have been sent to prison, and now the courts in England are requiring these women to take the children that they had as a result of these rapes to the prison to spend time with their fathers. I don't think Lot had to put up with this stuff. He really didn't. It's shocking. I mentioned this in my update 2 weeks ago about Celine Dion, and I think we might have had a bit of a copyright issue, so I've just put up some pictures. She has a new line of Celine Nunu, or something it's called, of children's gender neutral children's clothing. Where do you think this is going? They are not really our children, as we are all just links in an ever-ending chain of life, is what she says. They show her going into the nursery where the children are laying there in pink and blue, boys and girls. She blows this glitter, and then all of a sudden they're all dressed in these black and white clothes. This young baby says "New Order" on it. Well, what do you think this is advocating and pushing? This is, I believe, an Israeli company, by the way, that's behind this. Look at the crosses and that type of thing. Look at the sort of voodoo-type dolls that appear in the cribs. Here's an actual picture from the catalog of some of the clothing that's available. New Order, skull shirts, the little baby sleeper with skulls all over it. So, strike her off the list, I guess. And I don't think they even realize how, well, maybe they do. Look, if they realize how evil it is, then it's even more evil than I would give them credit for. Maybe I'm giving them too much credit. There's she was a Lutheran pastor in the ECLA, the Evangelical, ELCA, the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, Nadia Boltz-Weber. She is heavily tattooed, body piercing. She came out recently and said, well, it's okay. It's okay for everybody to watch porn as long as it's sourced properly. I'm not sure what that means. She has a new book out called Shameless, A Sexual Reformation. She pastored a church in the Denver area for a while. And one of the things about this is certificate, this is what she'll give you, certificate of impurity. So-and-so has traded in their purity rings in exchange for this certification, and in doing so vows to live a shameless, open, and free life with love for themselves and their body, knowing that they are already holy. And she suggested that they're going to take all the purity rings, melt them down, and fashion them into a female body part. Now, the response often is when I bring something up like this or somebody else says, well, that's not representative of all the ELCA. Okay, I accept that. Why is it representative of one person in the ELCA? Get rid of these people. Drum them out. Have heresy trials. This is mocking God. Now, so maybe she's just doing it to increase her book sales. Maybe Celine Dion's just doing it to make a buck. I mean, Celine Dion's only worth what, $500, $800 million? She really needs the money. There's a bigger agenda about this, and it's very, very troubling. Another thing that's troubling, did a gene edit shape 2 babies? This is from the New York Times. In China, sacrificing ethics for scientific glory, and a doctor has come out and said, I edited the genes in twins to remove something from the embryos so that they wouldn't develop a certain issue. This is Frankenstein stuff. I do not think we often wonder how bad is it going to get before the Lord returns. And I can only say to you, I don't go looking for really bad stuff because it's everywhere you look. This is the New York Times. And even the New York Times is concerned about this. And the Chinese have supposedly cracked down on it a little bit. They've said that they're investigating the guy. But look, the genie's out of the bottle, so to speak. And this stuff is only going to increase. And I do think it ties in with days of Noah, days of Lot, all the things that Jesus said we should be looking for in the end time, and the fact that they'll be increasing and there's going to be a real spike up at the end. And so I think we're on that upslope of the spike. And you often wonder, I see this all the time, how much longer? How much longer before God does something about it? And it's just not social, cultural, it's political, it's geopolitical, and we'll talk about that. For example, here is, and again, I may have mentioned this last week, the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration. There's a meeting that's taking place in about a week. I think it's on December 10th and 11th in Marrakesh, Morocco, about this global compact on migration. Now, what do you think they're talking about? This is done by the UN, under one of the UN agencies. Do you think they're talking about limiting migration? If you do, there's actually a Brooklyn Bridge just down the street a little bit from the UN headquarters, and here it's for sale. So listen, this is Objective 17, eliminate all forms of discrimination and promote evidence-based public discourse to shape perceptions of migration. Now, when do people on the left have ever been evidence-based? So this is Orwellian speak. This is people talking about basing things on evidence when they're really not going to use evidence. But listen, we commit to eliminate all forms of discrimination, condemn and counter expressions, acts and manifestations of racism, racial discrimination, violence, xenophobia, and related intolerance against all migrants in conformity with international human rights laws. Look down here what it says. To realize this commitment, we will draw from the following actions. Enact, implement, or maintain legislation that penalizes hate crimes and aggravated hate crimes targeting migrants, and train law enforcement and all other public officials to identify, prevent, and respond to such crimes and other acts of violence that target migrants, as well as to provide medical, legal, and psychosocial assistance for victims. They also say here to ensure that those who actively participate in the commission of a hate crime. Below, promote independent, objective, and quality reporting of media outlets, including internet-based information, including by sensitizing and educating media professionals on migration-related issues and terminology. So what's the translation of this? We're going to tell you what you can say, how you can say it, and what you're supposed to think. And you're going to toe the line, and you're not going to oppose our migration policy. And it goes on, establish mechanisms to prevent, detect, and respond to racial, ethnic, and religious profiling of migrants by public authorities. It sounds like we got this from the people filing the cases against the briefs filed against President Trump and some of his things that he does. Here's a European member of parliament. They had a little panel when this stuff was talked about at the European Parliament level, the EU Parliament level, and here's what he says is going to happen.
Say some words on the Global Compact on Migration. On the 10th and 11th of December, there will be an international congress in Marrakesh, Morocco, with regard to this Global Compact on Migration. And the participating countries are set to sign this agreement. And although this joint agreement isn't binding, it's still meant to be the legal framework on which the participating countries commit themselves to build new legislation. And one basic element of this new agreement is the extension of the definition of hate speech. The agreement wants to criminalize migration speech. Criticism of migration will become a criminal offense. And media outlets, and that also concerns you, that give room to criticism of migration can be shut down. The Compact for Migration is legalization of mass migration. It's declaring migration as a human right. So in fact, it will become impossible to criticize Ms. Merkel's welcome migrants politics without being at risk to be jailed for hate speech. So this agreement, to our humble opinion, is a coup d'etat of pro-migrant liberal globalists. And it will greatly benefit multinationals. Because you know, countries who import the third world will become the third world. And it's absolutely clear, and you all know that in third world countries, multinationals dictate the rules.
And so this is a UN, Refugees and Migrants, it's a UN agency, UN for Refugees, Migrants, that's their hashtag. So let's talk a little bit about the UN and what they did this week. Here is a headline from the Jerusalem Post on Friday morning, UNGA, UN General Assembly to disavow Jewish ties to Jerusalem. And you're going to say, well, there they go again. I mean, so what else is new, right? But what you need to know is they do this every year, and they do it on particular dates for a particular reason. And it's all tied together, and it is prophetic because it talks about people will rise up against Israel and the Jewish people in the last days. They will try to divide Jerusalem. They'll try to divide the land. And God will ultimately judge them for that. But it's prophesied that they're going to do this. So we should expect it. But just like God does things on particular days so that there is no mistake about what's happening and why, you need to look people in charge of the UN and other globalist organizations do things on particular days to drive a point. For example, the attacks on September 11th happened on a particular day because there are historical events in Islam tied to that particular day. And so that's why that's always what you would call a high watch time for those type of events, because they're trying to make a point. And they're trying to show you what event they are trying to get at historically. Now, it's interesting that at the time the UN General Assembly is trying to disavow Jewish ties to Jerusalem, and listen, it's not Jewish ties, It's Jewish and Christian ties to Jerusalem. That's what they're trying to get rid of. But God has a sense of humor, I think. This week, ring of Roman Governor Pontius Pilate, who crucified Jesus, found in Herodian site in the West Bank. It's actually Judea and Samaria, but we'll give this person some credit for at least reporting on it. Now, this ring was discovered about 50 years ago, and they've just sort of gotten around to looking at it, and what they found, here's the ring. It's a Greek inscription revealed on ring of Jesus killer. And this was reported in the press. And in fact, the bone fragment over here is supposedly the ring finger that it came from, and there is good evidence that this is the ring of Pontius Pilate. It was found in Israel, in Judea, Samaria, at a Herodian site. But the UN, they don't care about evidence. So they, on November 29th and November 30th, they had a meeting. And this is an article from one of the Israeli websites. I think it's Times of Israel. This is the date in 1947 when the UN General Assembly approved its partition and its partition resolution authorizing the establishment of two states, an independent state of Palestine and an independent Jewish state of Israel. The Palestinians and their surrounding Arab neighbors rejected the original two-state solution and with their usual response, violence. The creators of the Jewish state, on the other hand, were willing to accept this partition compromise. Israel subsequently offered the Palestinians a succession of opportunities for their own state, which the Palestinian leadership has rejected. And so in New York City on November 29th, 1947, 71 years ago this week, the UN General Assembly met and they had a vote on Resolution 181. This is Resolution 181 adopted on the report of the Ad Hoc Committee on the Palestinian Question. And so what they did was they voted. Here's the vote.
Soviet Union, yes. The United Kingdom, abstain. The United States, yes. Uruguay, yes. Venezuela, yes. Yemen, no. Yugoslavia, abstain. 4, 6, 10.
The resolution of the DAC Committee for Palestine was adopted by 33 votes, 13 against, 10 abstentions.
And that broke out wild celebrations. This is, and I use the New York Times a lot because they have a great historical record of their newspapers called Times Machine. And so you can look at the newspaper as it was published. And so this is the newspaper from the next day, November 30th, 1947. Assembly votes Palestine partition. Margin is 33-13. Arabs walk out. And then it says here, Arabs see UN murder, disavow any partition role. They didn't like it. That led to the British mandate was still in place at the time. The British mandate ended on around May 14th, 1948. That was the day that they went and they declared the state of Israel. And what happened? The Arab armies attacked. There was a war for independence in Israel. Israel eventually won. And this is what has led to what they call today the Palestinian refugee issue. They convinced a lot of people to leave, and they left. They went to other countries, and they're still there 71 years later. And I had a very long conversation with someone who identifies himself as a Palestinian refugee from Gaza. He spoke at the Christ at the Checkpoint conference. But here's the interesting issue. May 16th, 1947, 2 days after declaring independence, in the New York Times, what does it say here? Jews, what? In grave danger in all Muslim lands. 900,000 in Africa and Asia face the wrath of their foes. It's okay to everybody cough now. Let's all do it. Typhoid Fellowship Chapel here, Rhea. 900,000 Jews in Arab lands at that time. In fact, here is a summary from that article. You can see it down the page. How many were in Morocco, Iraq, Iran, and that sort of thing. Another interesting thing is this little editorial down here. This is from the New York Times. And it says this: not like Dachau, is it, Herr Mufti? And they have a picture there with a Nazi swastika on his back and on his head the Grand Mufti, who may have been, I think there's good evidence that he was the uncle of an Egyptian guy named Yasser Arafat. The Mufti went to Germany, worked with Adolf Hitler to give him help and learn how to get rid of the Jews. This is historical, documented fact. In fact, in Germany, there is a person right now who has been convicted of a crime for posting a picture on his Facebook or Twitter account of the Grand Mufti with Adolf Hitler. It is a historical fact. And all these people on the global migration side, they want to say, well, we're evidence-based. Baloney. Baloney. And so here's what's happened in the Jewish refugee thing. And this was noted in an article in the Jerusalem Post this week. Why is the story of the Jewish refugees so little known? And here's a graphic that I found. So, we have the article from the New York Times saying Jews in grave danger. It identifies how many, about 900,000. And today, this is from a few years ago, how many Jews remain in those countries? Algeria, 140,000 to 100. Libya, 38,000 to 0. Egypt, 75,000 to 100. Yemen, 55,000 to 200. Syria, 30,000 to 100. So I don't want to hear about how tolerant and open from people like Rick Wiles that Syria is, okay? The goal was to make their lands Judenrein, Jew-free. It's the same thing that Hitler did. And there, I don't like all the Hitler references, but there are times when it's actually appropriate. And this is the whole thing with the two-state solution. The Palestinians want a state that is Judenrein. And nobody will talk about it. And so I go to a conference like Christ at the Checkpoint and sit there and endure, and I claim the verse, he that endures to the end shall be saved, while I was there. But not one person talked about what happened to all the Jews that used to live in Arab lands prior to 1948. Now, well, one person did. I was talking to the Gaza doctor, who was one of the main speakers, and I said, what about these? Are you okay with the Jews going back to their homelands? And that was when I think he had to, I don't know, go brush his teeth before he spoke or something like that. So they never answered those questions. It's because what the Bible says would happen. Look, this is a quote. Syrian Minister of Defense said this: when I see a Jew before me, I kill him. If every Arab did this, it would be the end of the Jews. So in 1964, a new group of people was formed called the Palestinians, the Palestinian Liberation Army. And here is a picture, organization, and here is a picture of their first meeting that took place. What do you see on the wall? What's kind of interesting about where they're holding this meeting? Well, there's King Abdullah of Jordan and the Jordanian flag. They adopted a PLO charter in 1964, and Article 24 of that adoption, of what was adopted, said this: this organization does not exercise any regional sovereignty over the West Bank in the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. So they considered that area to be what? The Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. Well, what happened in 1967? There was a war. The PLO revised their charter. What I have a picture of there behind it is the July 1st through 17th, 1968 revision. And guess what? Article 24 is taken out. And so you see this, there was, if you think BDS is old, boycott, divest, and sanction, this was from the New York Times back in 1947 or 48. Arabs to boycott Palestinian goods. Vote action against Jewish industry, charging tie with Zionism and political aims. So this has been around. In 1968, this is the headlines, September 18th, 1968, Islamic fundamentalist groups splitting Palestinian uprising. And what happened? So this is not even just 30 years ago. A new organization was formed. The New York Times, let me be clear about where this was coming from. It's coming from the New York Times. 30 years ago. It says, Islamic fundamentalist group splitting Palestinian uprising. Hamas was identified by the New York Times as a Islamic fundamentalist group. It would be interesting to, and you probably have to tie them down, and I'm not advocating waterboarding, although when I think about it, a New York Times editorial staff person, and ask them, do you agree with the New York Times editorial position of 1988? That is, Hamas is an Islamic fundamentalist group. And it describes some of the things that they want to do. And it says here, only by holy war, see down here in the lower left-hand corner, the land of Palestine is an Islamic trust left to generations of Muslims until the day of resurrection, says the 40-page Hamas covenant issued on August 18th. It is forbidden for anyone to yield or concede part or all of it. It flatly rejected any PLO efforts at so-called peaceful solutions and international conferences. Quote, the solution to the Palestinian problem will only take place by holy war. The initiatives and international conferences only waste time. Now listen, even bad newspapers have to report some facts. Now they may spin them, okay? But this is the fact. This is quoting from their own documents. And so now here we come to November 29th, 2018, and the UN General Assembly holds a thing called the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian People. And one of the speakers there was a Temple University professor named Mark Lamont Hill. And this is what he said at his speech.
I am profoundly interested in the plight of the Palestinian people, as well as the broader ethical, moral, and political implications of their struggle for freedom and justice, as well as equality. The Great Catastrophe in May 1948, they resulted in the expulsion, murder, and to date, permanent dislocation of more than 1 million Palestinians. For every minute that the global community has articulated a clear and lucid framework for human rights, the Palestinian people have been deprived of the most fundamental of them. While the Universal Declaration for Human Rights says that all people are, quote, born free and equal in dignity and rights, the Israeli nation state continues to restrict freedom and undermine equality for Palestinian citizens of Israel, as well as those in the West Bank and Gaza. At the current moment, there are more than 60 Israeli laws that deny Palestinians access to full citizenship rights, simply because they're not Jewish. From housing to education to family reunification, it is clear that any freedoms naturally endowed to all human beings are actively being stripped away from Palestinians through Israeli statecraft. We have an opportunity to not just offer solidarity in words, but to commit to political action, grassroots action, local action, and international action that will give us what justice requires. And that is a free Palestine from the river to the sea.
From the river to the sea is from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean. That is to be. Now he'll say, well, it's just a one state. That's all I want. I just want. Listen, this person, CNN paid contributor, does he ever talk about this? And I can assure you, go to these lands and you're not allowed certain rights simply because you're Jewish. In fact, I talked to the doctor at the Christ at the Checkpoint conference, this one of the main evening speaker. And I said, Palestinian refugees, your people went to these other countries, and how are they treated there? They're denied citizenship rights. He admitted to me, go to Syria. I said, go to Yarmouk camp. It's a hellhole. Can they vote there? No, they can't really vote in. It's been 71 years, doctor. Why are you not complaining about them? Your people are denied rights there by Arabs. What is wrong with you? I didn't say that. That's implied. So, and Lamont Hill will say, well, I just meant from the river to the sea, one state. And this is Ambassador Danny Dion saying, former ambassador, Lamont Hill called for the elimination of the state of Israel from the map. Previously expressed his admiration for the anti-Semite Louis Farrakhan. Mark Lamont Hill is a racist, a bigot, and anti-Semite. The fact that he is all this while still on the payroll at CNN and Temple University is appalling. But even CNN has some standards. I did a little bit of research to find out what's happened to Palestinians in the Palestinian civil, or the Syrian civil war that started in March 2011. There's actually a website put up by the People Action Group for Palestinians of Syria. And what they found is there have been 3,902 killed, 1,711 detained, and 316 missing. Do you think Mark Lamont Hill has any concern about these people? What drives him? What Danny Dion said. He's a bigot. He may be a very cordial person, but listen, facts are facts. And this is how history is rewritten. Here's somebody, Code Pink. Linda Sarsour is the greatest ally to the Jewish people. You have, I don't want to go way over today, but I have to cover this. So here's Laura Ingraham the other night.
Joining me now with reaction, conservative commentator Michelle Malkin and Code Pink's national co-director Ariel Gold. All right, Ariel, now you say that Linda Sarsour is an ally of the Jewish people. Then why would Jewish Americans like Jonathan Greenblatt, he's the head of the Anti-Defamation League, have a real problem with their statements?
Code Pink.
So disgraceful that Jonathan Greenblatt is spending his time going after people who are our real allies. After the attack on Jewish cemeteries, Linda Sarsour raised over $100,000. After the Pittsburgh massacre, she raised over $200,000. Why are people trying to drive wedges between Muslim and Jewish partnership? We have no greater ally in the Jewish community in this time where anti-Semitism is dangerously on the rise than Linda Sarsour.
So the Anti-Defamation League doesn't know what anti-Semitism is?
The Anti-Defamation League is completely out of line in this case, and they are on the wrong track. They're on a witch hunt against Linda Sarsour for being a strong Palestinian Muslim woman, rather than dealing with the fact that we have white nationalism in the Senate, in the House, and in the White House.
Let's talk about this, Michelle. I think that sadly, you know, when we have these very emotional appeals by people like Linda Sarsour, she's kind of an interesting figure. I mean, she's very, you know, captivating in many ways, the way she talks. She's a leftist. She hates Trump. Woman, Muslim. And so I think a lot of people kind of give her a lot of slack for that reason. And yet, if conservatives say one thing out of line, you got media matters, little people in their underwear in the basement writing about you, you get all these things, well, you know, boycott, boycott, boycott. But someone like Linda Sarsour gets away to get Mercedes sponsoring her interviews. Shocking.
Yeah, right. Well, she's bamboozled a lot of people, and she is a master at using the Islamic technique of taqiyya, which is lying to promote the Islamic Caliphate and Sharia law. And I just want to give credit to all of the outspoken critics of Sharia out there who have been squelched by social media and who have been marginalized by the elites in the mainstream media. People like Laura Loomer, who was the one who was responsible for confronting those women's march organizers who marched in to one of these Politicon conferences in LA and was the one who disrupted it to call Alyssa Milano to the carpet. And it wasn't until that happened that these women's march leaders finally acknowledged the toxic anti-Semitism that lies at the intersection of the extreme left and radical Islam. There is a type of Sharia, an American Sharia, a Silicon Valley Sharia that seeks to silence those voices. And I think that Ariel Gold in particular has a lot of gall talking about repairing relationships with people when Ariel Gold and Code Pink itself have been so much responsible for the kind of toxic anti-Semitism and hatred of Israel that we're seeing. In fact, Ariel Gold has uttered the same phrase that Mark Lamont Hill got fired for, from the river to the sea, which is not just a dog whistle, it is a blatant call. It is the most famous call for the extermination of the state of Israel.
And good for Michelle Malkin. And, you know, maybe I should have, I loved her reaction as she's sitting there, very respectful, quiet. And maybe I should title one of these updates like sucking on a bag of lemons or something like that, because that's what she looked like. And she goes on, and Ariel goes, "Oh, you don't understand what from the river to the sea means." And I don't have the whole clip, but, you know, Michelle, she puts on her glasses and she gets a paper, and you're lying, you know. So she, good for Michelle, she did that directly. So there are people out there, and amazing, she went to Oberlin. She's a graduate of Oberlin College up in Oberlin, Ohio. Really pretty radical, left wing. I mean, I don't even think they serve tacos in the cafeteria up there because it's cultural appropriation or something. Just, I like tacos, they're really good. So the UN General Assembly come in and they have like 4 or 5 resolutions that they vote on. The first two, one deals with Jerusalem, one deals with the Golan, other various topics, all about the Palestinian people, all addressed in a big long General Assembly conference on November 29th, 2018, the anniversary of the partition plan. So the main one was, one of the main ones was Jerusalem. And here's what some of these provisions are. This is what the resolution actually says, taken right off their website. You can download the PDF if you want. Expressing its concern about the Israeli excavations undertaken in the old city of Jerusalem, including in and around religious sites. Expressing its grave concern in particular about tensions, provocations, and incitement regarding the holy places of Jerusalem, including the Haram al-Sharif, and urging restraint and respect for the sanctity of the holy sites by all sides. It's the Temple Mount. That's what it's called. But Sharia-compliant resolutions. Reiterates its determination that any actions taken by Israel, the occupying power, to impose its laws, jurisdiction, and administration on the holy city of Jerusalem are illegal and therefore null and void and have no validity whatsoever, and calls upon Israel to immediately cease all such illegal and unilateral measures. The Israeli representative had this to say.
I turn now to the Special Information Program on the question of Palestine, led by the DPI, which organizes an annual seminar on peace in the Middle East. Do not be mistaken by the title. This seminar has nothing to do with peace. It has everything to do with anti-Israel sentiment and does little to promote dialogue and understanding between Israelis and Palestinians. This year's seminar had a panel titled 70 Years After Nakba Day. The term Nakba means catastrophe. By adopting this term at the seminar, the Special Information Program of the DPI is endorsing the Palestinians' denial of Israel's legitimacy. Let me be clear. Calling the establishment of Israel a catastrophe is not a statement of solidarity with the Palestinians. It is a denial of Israel's right to exist. Two of these resolutions discuss the Temple Mount, a sacred place for all three monotheistic religions, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. Yet, these resolutions have deliberately omitted any reference to the Jewish or Christian connection to the Temple Mount, or as we call it in Hebrew, Har HaBayit. This omission was deliberate. It shows yet another instance of the Palestinians' refusal to recognize the proven historical connection between Judaism, Christianity, the Temple Mount, and Jerusalem as a whole. The international community must stop participating in such a blatant denial of history. You must not permit these blatant attempts to delegitimize Israel. As for the resolution regarding the Golan, the situation in Syria is dire. For the past 7 years, the Syrian regime has been systematically killing its own people and has even used chemical weapons against them. Israel, at the same time, has been taking care of thousands of injured Syrians in our hospitals. And yet, despite the realities on the ground, at the GA, absurdity prevails. Madam President, supporting the 6th anti-Israel resolution presented today will neither advance nor inspire peace. It will only inspire hate.
Well, that's true. And so what was the vote? Here was the vote on Jerusalem resolution: in favor 148, against 11, 14 abstained. The U.S. and Israel, of course, voted against it, as did the Solomon Islands, Palau, Marshall Islands, Micronesia, Kiribati, Guatemala, Canada, Australia. Then there was a vote on the Syrian Golan, and it says this. Also, this is one of the things in the resolution, also declares that the Israeli decision of 14 December 1981 to impose its laws, jurisdiction, and administration on the occupied Syrian Golan is null and void and has no validity whatsoever, as confirmed by the Security Council in its resolution 497. Determines once more that the continued occupation of the Syrian Golan and its de facto annexation constitute a stumbling block in the way of achieving a just, comprehensive, and lasting peace in the region. And the vote on that, 99 in favor, 10 against, 66 abstentions. Justice Minister Shaked of the Israeli Settler Home Party, or Israeli Home Party, talked about a confederation. This is what at least that party's plan is. Our plan is to apply Israeli sovereignty on Area C and give the Palestinians living there full citizenship. Areas A and B will be part of a confederation together with Jordan and Gaza. There's a large Palestinian population, she said, in Jordan, and the Palestinians already have a state in Gaza. In the distant future, a confederation of these three entities will be the right way forward. And of course, Ambassador David Friedman, he came out in an interview, and he said that the peace plan, Trump peace plan, which everybody says is going to be December 1st, it's not December 2nd, hasn't been released, probably delayed till next year, maybe till after the Israeli elections. If it's ever released, I don't know, we'll watch it. Friedman says peace plan will be released when the time is right. By the way, the Muslim majority country of Chad sent their leader to Israel to meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Israel's making a lot of alliances in the Arab world right now. Sudan, though, won't do it. Sudan is part of the Ezekiel 38-39, at least the area of Sudan is part of this. Here's just a brief interview with Ambassador Friedman where he talked about sort of the overarching concern in any peace plan.
Nobody should be asked to take incremental security risk in pursuit of something that has yet to bear fruit. So we're very cognizant of Israel's security needs.
Are the new regional alliances that seem to be emerging between Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, Jordan, Egypt, and Israel, is that part of the calculation?
It's all opening up, and I think it's just beginning. And I think that environment, creates opportunity, and I think it gives the Israeli public some confidence that they're not being asked.
So they're not being asked to buy a pick and a poke. Well, he wouldn't say pick and a poke, but you know, just to buy, take things at face value. Sorry, that was a faux pas. Brian will edit that one out, I'm sure. And he'll probably put a timestamp link in the description to that one. Caroline Glick has a great article. Europe beats Iran's war drums. Last Saturday, Iran's moderate president, Hassan Rouhani, called Israel a cancerous tumor in a speech. I played a little bit of, showed you this last week. At the regime's annual Islamic Unity Conference, Rouhani's fellow speakers included Deputy Hezbollah Chief Naim Qassem and Hamas Chief Ismail Haniyeh. Both terror bosses called for the destruction of the cancerous tumor. With the predictability of a Swiss clock, the Europeans rushed to condemn the Rouhani. The EU and Brussels condemned Rouhani. The German Foreign Ministry condemned Rouhani, and so on and so forth. And here's a little report from the Iranian news, Press TV, talking about what the purpose of this conference was.
Over 500 dignitaries, scholars, politicians, and rights activists from across the Muslim world were present at this year's Islamic Unity Conference. The goal, as of every year, is to call for unity among Muslims of different schools of thought, something which these people believe to be the only way out of many crises that have gripped the Muslim world, including the Israeli occupation of Palestine, which is the main theme of this year's conference.
We have to take the chance to bring the Muslims nearer, all Muslims nearer to us, to make the Ummah complete, but to declare that Mecca, Medina, Palestine belongs to us. American, Israel, they will not allow to get it by peace. But we have the chance, we have to fight for these three holy cities which belongs to the Muslims.
What the US calls the deal out of century is an American-Israeli plot aimed at ending any talk about the Israeli occupation. Their ultimate goal is to bolster Israel's power in the region. This way, displaced Palestinians could never return to their homeland.
These people say Israel has been trying to push the Palestinian cause into oblivion by making Muslims point their guns at each other. The Islamic Unity Conference also saw the reading of a declaration which called for cooperation between Muslim nations based on their religious commonalities and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, who had warned Muslims of the outcome of discord before his departure.
Delegates here say as long as the Muslim community is fragmented, Palestinians will have to live under the dark shadow of Israel's occupation. They say it's time to put aside differences and instead unite for a shared cause.
Well, Caroline goes on in an article to note that while the EU condemned Rouhani, at the same time they're trying to set up these back-channel corporations and trade banks and whatever to kind of undermine the U.S. sanctions on Iran. In other words, she says, according to the quoted diplomat, the Europeans would rather shut their eyes to the reality of Iran's aggression and empower the terror-sponsoring Ayatollahs that acknowledge that Trump is right and that Iran poses danger to Europe that mustn't be countenanced. And here is, as this was going on, here is Federica Mogherini, the EU foreign minister, meeting with Foreign Minister Zarif of Iran in Europe. While this was going on, there was this conference that took place, the G20 conference in Argentina. Here's the group photo picture. I'm going to wave to everybody. And then there was this kind of rather bizarre exchange between Putin and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Apparently somebody told a very good joke, or they're passing something off on someone. This went on for quite a while. And there's Boy Wonder from Boy Blunder, as they call him in Canada, Theresa May, Emmanuel Macron, Xi of China, and that was the conference. So here's your, if you want your group picture, there's a good one. And then there was a rather bizarre exchange. The audio is not good in this, so don't bother turning it up, between Macron and Mohammed bin Salman. And so Macron supposedly said, I am worried, I told you, you never listened to me because I told you it was an opportunity for you. And MBS said, it's okay, I can take it, I'm not worried. While Macron was doing this at the G20 in Argentina, Paris is in meltdown. It's essentially central Paris has been locked down. Protests, escalating violence, cars burned. This is the scene there on the Champs-Élysées in Paris. Protests over increased fuel tax, particularly diesel fuel tax. And it's clear that there's an elite in Europe that doesn't really care about the common people, and this is a major problem. Macron's approval rating has plummeted to below about 29%. They wonder if his election will last. Saudi Arabia daily output was a record this past week. I have a number of things. It's going to take about 10 minutes. I'm going to rush through it. I don't apologize for going over. I'm going over. So this is an article from Geopolitical Futures back about a month ago, Israel's Strategic Reality. And I just only put it up there was look at the map as to who Israel is having problems with. Now, that ought to, countries involved in an Iran-Israel war. They're not at war right now. Secular Geopolitical Futures is talking about a coming Israel-Iran war, and look who the players are. Now go read Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39 and see if those don't seem to line up. And listen, folks, and it's not just a physical war. This is a war of principalities in high places that manifests itself here on the earth. George Friedman says the current fighting in Gaza is part of years of sporadic conflict, but there's more to it. The spread of Iranian power has threatened Sunni Arabs in the region, particularly the Saudis. Now it has reached the point of forcing Israel to consider preemptive action, and Gaza is the least dangerous force excuse me, with which it can deal. The Israelis clearly didn't take Hamas' offers for an agreement seriously, likely due to its rocket production capabilities. The Israelis have warned the Lebanese about Hezbollah's rockets. You see, what's going on in Gaza is connected to what can happen and what's going on in the Lebanon border regions of northern Israel in the mountain areas. And so there's this growth in Iranian power that has to be dealt with. Talks about this. Israel's doing exercises to handle a two-front war. Actually, their military is going through those exercises. And then Friedman says this, the Israelis are contemplating full peripheral warfare. It comes down to how badly the Iranians want to hold their current position and the extent to which they are willing to back down. The possibility of defeat might be enough to force them to choose another day. And here, this is an interesting thing. These ladies live in the border region near Gaza. And so what did the UN representative say? Oh, gee, we're sorry you're getting hit with rockets. It's like, well, why do you bother to live here? Why don't you just move? But what they don't understand is if they had the rockets and their capabilities are increasing, all Israel would be in play, just as all Israel is in play from some of the rockets that Hezbollah has. It's shocking that the UN representative would even say such a thing. A couple quick articles we'll look at. This is a great article by Jonathan Spire. After the Fall is a book he wrote about the Syrian civil war. He's a very good thinker. He lives in Israel. writes very well. He's very thoughtful. And he's been up in these areas. He's spent a lot of time in Syria, at great risk to himself, by the way. A new order emerges in southern Syria. There are two articles I want to leave you with here. So here it is. Meanwhile, as the regime's security organs prey on former leaders. So it's talking about the Syrian regime, what's happening in southern Syria and along the Golan border. This is very significant. As the Syrian regime's security organs prey on former leaders of the fragile order that emerged in the 2011 to 2018 period, the new dispensation in southwest Syria is emerging. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and its proxy militias, including Lebanese Hezbollah and Iraqi groups such as Asayb al-Haq, are an integral part of it. A recent report on the Syrian Observer website provided details of a large Iranian base under construction in the Lajat area of the Daraa province. That's a little bit to the east of where Daraa is, so it'd be sort of in the center of Jordan. Evidence is also emerging of the presence of Hezbollah personnel and other pro-Iranian Shia militiamen in Syrian Arab army uniforms among the regime forces returning to the border area with the Golan Heights. What's this telling you? The Iranians are very sneaky. Who would have imagined that? I mean, I'm sure John Kerry thought this all the way through, so did Barack Obama when they entered into that ridiculous joint comprehensive deal with Iran on the nuclear problem. This is despite, Jonathan notes, the nominal Russian commitment to keep such elements, these Iranian elements, at least 85 kilometers from the border. I think I should say it might be a typo. And so look, this should not be surprising to anyone that they would cheat and fudge. And the Russians do it too. This Iranian activity close to the border goes hand in hand with Tehran's activity further afield, including the transfer of Shias from southern Iraq to deserted Sunni neighborhoods. More on that in just a moment. All this adds up to an emergent new post-war order in the regime-controlled part of Syria. Those who hope for one kind of new Syria are being rounded up, detained, and disappeared, including Palestinians, I might add, as I noted earlier. Iran, meanwhile, is busy creating a very different kind of new order. In it, an independent Iranian presence is intertwined with and largely indistinguishable from the body of the Syrian state itself, in a way not coincidentally analogous to the situation in Lebanon and Iraq, minus the nominal institutions of representative government. Memory.org, also a great website that you should check, also has a long thing here about, here's what it says. Throughout the Syria war, websites opposed to the Assad regime have repeatedly claimed that this regime and its ally Iran were using the war to change Syria's demographics. How? By expelling Sunni populations deemed a potential threat to the regime. Assad regime is Alawite, which is sort of related to Shiite. And so Iran is capitalizing on this to create their corridor from Iran to the Mediterranean. And what they've done, they barrel bombed these cities that were Sunni cities, and these people have left. They've emigrated to Europe in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions. It was a cleansing that took place. President Assad outlined this policy in the July 2015 speech, saying, "The homeland does not belong to those who live here, nor to those who hold a passport or are citizens. The homeland belongs to those who protect and guard it." And General Breedlove, I played this clip a number of times back in February of 2016, testifying before one of the House or Senate committees, had this to say about what is going on in Syria and what is up with this migration issue.
Sir, I cannot, again, I look at what I see in capabilities and capacities, and then I determine intent. So what I have seen in Syria, in places like Aleppo and others, are what I would call absolutely indiscriminate, unprecise bombing, rubblizing major portions of a city that do not appear to be, to me, to be against any specific military target, because the weapons they're using have no capability of hitting specific targets. They are unguided, dumb weapons. And what I have seen in the Assad regime from the beginning, when they started using barrel bombs, which have absolutely no military utility, they are unguided and crude, and what are they designed to do is terrorize the public and get them on the road. Later, Assad using chlorine gas and other chemical type approaches to these same barrel bombs. Again, almost zero military utility, designed to get people on the road and make them someone else's problem. Get them on the road, make them a problem for Europe, to bend Europe to the will of where they want them to be. And so I see a continuing pattern in Aleppo and other places of this indiscriminate use of military capability, that all I can determine from it is the goal is to get more people on the road and make them a problem for someone else to bend the will of those being affected.
Thank you, General. I yield back.
Well,
very disturbing.
So that
Mr.
was
Ashford.
that's important testimony. I mean, look where we are, and now all these other newspapers, Dr. Spire, Dr. Jonathan Spire, are picking up on this, and this is what I've said for a long time. Others have said for a long time. There's an a cleansing of the Sunni sect from that area of Syria, and they're bringing in people. The Memory website says they're bringing them in by the tens of thousands to replace the population that was there, and they're coming from Iraq and elsewhere, and they're Shiite. They're not bringing in Sunnis. They're not bringing in Jewish people. They're bringing them from Afghanistan and elsewhere. And this has huge prophetic implications. The JCPA website, Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, it's one that I would highly recommend that you put into your rotation. Iran prepares for escalation on Israel's northern border. It was an article that was there this week. Commentators on the Arab world are watching Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Gadi Eisenkot with interest following media reports that he canceled an important meeting in Germany called for next week, and the reasons for his cancellation remain obscure. They believe it is connected to developments on the northern border and not specifically to the situation in Gaza following the renewal of Egyptian contacts with Israel and Hamas to advance the understandings for calm. The Iranian leadership is sure that Israel is weak, and this is the right time to strike it. And back to this conference that took place in Tehran, this Islamic Unity Conference, the leader, Khamenei, got up and he said at the 32nd International Unity Conference in Tehran on November 24th, a week ago yesterday, Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei made the following statements about Israel. The Zionist enemy crumpled against the Palestinian resistance after only 2 days. All this proves that the Zionist regime is significantly weakened. The pace of weakening is increasing. What's that lead to? It leads to them being emboldened to do what they've wanted to do. This is setting things up. I'm not saying things are going to happen this week. But everything is being set up. There was also another article, how Iran almost triggered a three-front war against Israel. Prime Minister Netanyahu said Israel is in one of the most complex situations in its history. That is an understatement. He said this, I cannot elaborate on our plans for the future. He's now the defense minister as well as prime minister. I cannot elaborate on our plans for the future, but we will determine the right conditions and the right times for the state of Israel, those which are optimal for the security of our citizens. And look, the Iranians said, well, the defense minister, Lieberman, resigned, so that proved that we won in Gaza. That rocket barrage got us what we wanted. We're tearing down the government's falling apart. And then there's this, these are Iranian brigades that are in Lebanon and Syria, and they have both Hezbollah and Iranian patches on them. This is happening along the Golan border. And I think, and then this report Tel Aviv residents won't be sitting in cafes in any next war because of the rocket capabilities that Hezbollah has. So listen, everything is very volatile. At the risk of overstating it, I don't think I've seen a week where there's as much in play as I saw today. So pay attention, stay in the Word, be sure you're sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ with people. Their only hope is salvation by grace through faith in Jesus Christ. That's your assurance. Had some friends this week. They're early in the week, the father passed away. He was a longtime pastor, missionary. He and his wife got married at 19. They were married 69 and a half years. He's been in failing health and he passed away. Good people. I know their children. They raised a great family. They were a loving couple. And less than 4 days later, she passed away. Which I told Pam, I don't think she'll last a week. Because they were in love, and I think it's a great testimony to a faithful Christian marriage. But listen, Jesus is coming. Be ready. And listen, I'm all for that one world government that Jesus will set up when he returns. Amen. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for your word. Bless us this week. Give us the opportunities to share the truth of the Word of God and the truth and only hope of the gospel of Jesus Christ. In Jesus' name, amen.